Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Embers of Rebellion. Episode 2. Chapter 11. I spent all night writing a list for Valerie of everything that I noticed needed doing around the place, but it was a little challenging, considering I didn't know what half the place looked like. I also spent a good chunk of time listing ways to advertise the site once it was up and running. I didn't even know this place existed until I drove past it in the taxi on my way back to my car. Lived in this city my entire life, and I never realized there was a hotel on this side of the city and on the main street. Valerie would not need this information until the place was ready to open, which was a long way off. And that is if it passed the health and safety inspections first, because this place was literally falling apart at the seams. I managed to get a hold of Macy and Zoe. They were keen to find work. Both of them were floored with the amount Valerie was willing to pay them, making me realize it wasn't just me that was underpaid and overworked when I was working, but rogues in general. Macy said her mother would watch her daughter, and Zoe said she would have to bring hers but had a baby carrier and pram she could use. 16-year-old Zoe, I felt terrible for her being so young. Her mother was a rogue but died when she was a child, and she has spent her entire life in and out of child orphanages and refugees. How lonely it would feel to be entirely on your own all your life. I spent over an hour on the phone with her. She sounded miserable where she was. So I ended up going down and speaking to Valerie and asking if it was alright if Zoe shared the room with me. It had a fold-out bed. If Zoe would feel weird about sharing the double with me, Valerie nicely agreed and seemed excited about someone Zoe coining here. The following day, I woke up to Valerie calling out to me, her voice faint as she called out from downstairs. Sitting up, I see Valerian is still asleep, and my mouth falls open when I realize it is nearly 10 a.m. We slept in. Usually, I am up as soon as the sky lightens when sleeping in my car, around 6 a.m. Marin, wakey, comes Valerie's voice from the other side of the door as she knocks. I quickly rushed to the door, embarrassed that I slept so late. Opening it, Valerie was standing there with smoke between her lips, wearing jeans and a tank top, with a vest that was open, and she had steel cap boots on. She looked ready to kick, hopefully not mine. She was one tough lady with a heart of gold. Finally, you are up. Did you have a good sleep? I didn't want to wake you, she says. I am so sorry. I go to tell her, but she waves me off. Don't worry about that, I turned your alarm off and came in with the master key. Come. I need your help unloading my truck, she says, walking off toward the stairs. I look back in the room. Valerian sleeps peacefully, and I leave the door open before following her down the stairs in my pajamas. I have been shopping, couldn't have Valerian sleeping on that mattress, and now Zoe is coining with her baby. I thought I would grab some things, it turns out I have a shopping problem. Everything was so cute and reminded me of when I went shopping for my son when I had him, Valerie gushes, her sparkle bright with her excitement. Pointing to the tray of her truck. I blink, shocked. She had indeed been shopping. My hands go to my mouth. Valerie, I was gobsmacked. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't believe she had done all this for two rogue girls she barely knew and one she hadn't even met yet. There were 2 cots, 2 of everything. And everything you could possibly think of, including baby toys. Both babies would be a little too young to play with, even baby mobiles and cot sheets and blankets. Oh, check this out, this even has a camera so you can watch them while they sleep, Valerie says, holding up a baby monitor. Didn't have these when mine was a young'un. I don't know what to say, this is seriously the nicest thing someone has done for me, and you have already done enough, and I just met you," I croaked out, becoming emotional. Big fat tears rolled down my face. How could one woman be so kind? She has shown more kindness in the last 24 hours than I received in the year I have been rogue. It takes a village to raise a child. We are going to build our own village, Valerie says before clapping her hands. Now, let's get this stuff up to the room before the delivery truck comes. We also need to get that bed out. 2 new ones arrive around 12. What time will the girls get here? They said 10 this morning. Well, we better hop to it. Then I need a coffee and about 10 more of these to build up the motivation, she says, holding up her smoke. I chuckle, and we start undoing the straps holding everything in place. I was exhausted when I ran the last of it up, the room looking more like a baby store. I shook my head, trying to figure out where the heck Zoe and I were going to put it all. Valerie was having a rest and feeding Valerian a bottle. She was very fond of my son and commented about 4 or 5 times already about his eyes. Her fascination with them confused me. Hearing a truck reversing, Valerie hops up, looking out the door and over the balcony. Now, please tell me that is your car. Otherwise, I have just stolen someone else's from the train station, she giggles. What? I ask, getting up and walking over to see a tow truck with my car on the back. Yes, that is my beast, I would have walked back and got it, I told her, feeling bad she wasted money getting it towed. Nonsense, Phil owed me a favor anyway, picked him up one time when his truck broke down, said he owed me one, and I simply collected, she said. The truck door opens, and a big burly trucker gets out with a beard and balding head. Val, where do you want it? He calls out to her. Anywhere, Phil, we have the keys to move it, she calls back to him. Looking at the time, I see it is nearly 10 in the morning. I told the girls I would meet them out front near the curb so they could find the place easier. They were also unaware there was a hotel here and were confused when I mentioned the address. Girls should be nearly here, I tell Valerie, and she waved me off, going back to feeding Valerian and fussing over them. I smile at her. Valerie's whole attitude seemed different since yesterday. Valerie seemed almost happy. It was almost like she had found a new lease on life. Chapter 12. Not long after the truck leaves my car in the parking lot, I am waiting on the curb. Zoe got out of the taxi first as it stopped beside me. Zoe pays for the cab, and I help her grab her stuff from the trunk. I never knew this place was here, she says, looking up at the vast hotel. Kinda creepy, it looks haunted, she adds, and I chuckle. Anyway, I am so glad to see you again. I have been so excited I barely slept a wink last night, Zoe tells me, giving me a hug. So, is this everything? I ask her looking down at the pram and duffel bag. Yep, that's everything, our life in a bag. Pathetic, isn't it? No. See that piece of scrap metal, I tell her, pointing at my busted wagon. She nods her head. That was home sweet home, I tell her, and she laughs. Seriously, as for baby stuff, don't even worry about it. Valerie went on a shopping spree. The room is packed with everything, baby. So much so we may have to sleep outside to fit it all in the room, I tell her. What, really? How long have you known Valerie? She asks. Met her yesterday. She is lovely. I have never met anyone like her before, I tell Zoe, and she smiles just as a green Daihatsu charade pulls up next to us, honking its horn a few times. Thanks, bro, Macy says, punching her brother in the shoulder and climbing out before tapping the roof. Hi, girls, her brother calls out, and we both wave to the stranger. Blake, stop hitting on my friends. They aren't interested, Macy scolds her brother as he waves to us. Macy flips him off, and he laughs, driving off down the road. Sorry about him. He is a sleaze, so try to stay away from him unless you want another baby, Macy chuckles, shaking her head. Noted, I tell her, and she quickly hugs us. She had on short shorts and a cut-off shirt showing her belly button, her hair pulled in a bun, and a pair of boots that she said she borrowed from her brother, as well as a tool belt around her hips. Brother is a handyman, she tells us when she catches both of us looking at it. So this is it. Hey, this place is a dump, Macy says as we stand in the parking lot, looking up at the building. The bones were good mostly, but she was right, it was definitely a dump. So you girls interested in helping me clean this dump? Valerie's voice says from behind us, making us jump. You scared me, it has potential, Macy says nervously. For a dump? Valerie asks, her lips tugging up. I didn't mean, Macy goes to say when Valerie waves her off. It's a dump, I may be getting older, girly, but I ain't blind yet. Pretty sure if one of you jumped in that pool over there, you wouldn't come out again. Water is probably nuclear, that might actually be that foul smell, she says thoughtfully, before shrugging. So you all up for the job? I will pay on time, and anything this place needs, let me know, and I will try order it in, but there is a catch, she asks, and they both nod. What's the catch? Zoe asks. We are completely on our own. I have not had one electrician or handyman, even a plumber out here in over 10 years. My mate ruined that ST for me, so if you girls have got any friends that are good with that CP, let me know. If not, we will figure it out ourselves, Valerie tells them. That was going to be hard trying to source help and an electrician being the main thing because I didn't fancy handyman, my brother. That's where I got the tool belt and tools. Electrician, no idea, Macy shrugs. I may be able to help with that, Zoe says, and we all look at her. My daughter's father is an electrician. He found his mate but doesn't want her to find out he already has a kid. So I will threaten to tell her, he either helps when I ask or finds someone that will. Chances are he will probably find someone else, but I know he will do it, Zoe says confidently. I like you already, you tell him, Darl, Valerie says. So that leaves plumbing, which we will figure out, I guess, I tell everyone, and we all nod. So, what do you want to do first? Macy asks. First, we fix the girls' room, so it is livable. Then we will start the others, one at a time, and list everything as we go, Valerie says, and we all agree, heading up to the room. We stack everything in the bathroom before tossing all furniture over the balcony into the skip bin Valerie had dropped off. Valerie watched the kids in her studio while we got everything out. Once we were done, we then started ripping up the carpet. Hey Val, Macy calls over the balcony. Valerie must answer because she starts talking again. Have all these rooms got floorboards under the carpet? I was expecting concrete. Yeah, why? I looked down at the exposed floorboards, in perfect condition, and just needed a good clean and polish. Because I don't think re-carpet, the floorboards are in good condition in this room. If the rest are the same, you will save a fortune by rubbing them back and staining them. But if they are like this room, they will only need a polish, Macy tells her. Ratio, we will check the others later and see what rooms can be salvaged. We stripped the smelly carpet out, tossing it in the skip bin. The girls helped me carry the beds and mattresses up when the truck arrived, and the rest of the day was spent scrubbing it from floor to ceiling. While working, Valerie bought us drinks and sandwiches at lunchtime, but we were all stuffed and collapsed on Valerie's lounge in her studio by the time the day ended. So, how many rooms total are there? Macy asks. I was also curious. It took us an entire day cleaning and fixing one double room, but I hadn't even walked around the building yet, and Valerie said there were units out the back and a functions room. Good question, she thinks to herself like she couldn't remember. 23 rooms, 8 units that have 4 bedrooms in each and also the restaurant, function hall, there is a rear garden too. Honestly haven't been out the back in at least 3 or 4 years, so knows what you will find back there, it is a jungle out the back. Then the pool area, also there is laundry and games room and play center downstairs and a bar. Ah, this is going to K*LL us, Macy says, pulling some underlay from the carpet out of her hair. She looks at her phone and sighs. My brother is here to pick me up, I will see you both tomorrow. I think the early start, that sun was today? 7 AM too early, Valerie asks, and Macy shakes her head. Nope, perfect, see you all tomorrow, Macy says, walking out giving us a wave. Bye, I called after her. This was an impossible job, so much needed doing, and I just had to remind myself one room at a time. Otherwise, it would be overwhelming. No wonder Valerie couldn't do it on her own. It was too much for 20 people, and there were 4 of us and 2 babies. I sigh, and Valerie suddenly reaches for the TV remote on the coffee table, turning the volume up. It was the news, but I instantly realized what caught her attention. Alpha Lucian was once again on the news. A video plays out, and my heart lurches into my throat when I recognize the person he appears to be arguing with. It was my father, both of them screaming at each other in some club, and my father swings at him. His punch barely missing when Alpha Lucian steps out of the way laughing at him when suddenly my father shifts. The recording cuts off, and the news anchor says they couldn't continue playing the video as some viewers may find it distressing. The news then goes on about the old rivalry between my father and the Blood Alpha. Valerie looks over at me nervously. When are they going to get over themselves? Every week one of them is on the news, and quite frankly, I could not care less who the Blood Alpha is dating or who *T on whose turf, Zoe says, shaking her head. That is not the mental image I wanted in my head, I chuckle. Been going for years, one day, they both may grow up before they lose everything for good, Valerie states, and I nod sadly. Zoe, entirely oblivious to my connection with both of us, sighs. No wonder the city is doomed with them morons running the place, couldn't have said it better myself, Valerie counters. Chapter 13. 2 months later her hands kept clawing at my clothes as we stumbled into my room. I snap at her. She jumps from my bed, snatching up her clothes and darting out. Her eyes are wide and tear-filled. When my bathroom door opens, I flop back down on my bed, and my beta, Dante, walks in. Man, you need to get laid. You have been nothing since that redhead was here. What redhead? I ask, tossing the blanket over to cover myself. You know the night you booted that rogue girl out of here, he says, and I try to think back to that night. That was actually the last time. Dante turns about to leave when I notice how he is dressed. All done up like he is about to go on a date. Giving him the once-over. He was an alright looking man, I suppose. He gets about as much as I do. Relief floods me. Where are you going? I have a date, he announces to me. I growl at him, waving him off. Dante chuckles and leaves. I watch as he walks out of my room before getting up. I jump in the shower trying to wash my annoyance away, my thoughts drifting off the Alpha meeting a year ago. It was a costume party. She was dressed in a fairy outfit and covered in glitter. Her mask covered most of her face, but she had blue-gray eyes and plump, pouty lips. I felt drawn to her the moment she walked onto the dance floor, the way her hips moved, and she danced like she didn't have a care in the world. I was like a moth to a flame, and we were both obliterated. I wished I knew the woman's name or which pack she was from to track her down. I have not been able to forget her for some reason. She always randomly popped up in my head. I wished she had taken off the mask to picture her better, yet I awoke to her gone. She disappeared, and I had nothing to go on. Peeved was an understatement. Usually, I was the one that did the morning dash before they woke up, but that woman was long gone by the time I woke up, just the faint lingering scent. I awoke to Dante sitting at the small table drinking coffee and smirking at me. Cinderella slipped away this morning looking rather guilty. It looks like someone finally pulled one over the big bad alpha. Dante had mocked me and then laughed, thinking it was hilarious. The one woman I actually wanted to know escaped me. Now you decide to work, I growl, annoyed. Getting out, I wrap a towel around me before mumbling and heading back to my bedroom. A growl escapes me when I see the Omega sprawled out lying on my bed. Dante, he must have sent her back up here. Looking down, it was still hard. I shrug. I will just think of my mystery fairy. What's your name? I ask her, and she looks at me like I just proposed to her. Omegas. I asked for her name, not her hand in marriage. Tatum, she tells me while shuffling to the end of my bed too eagerly. Well, Tatum, you have 2 seconds to either start, I tell her. I close my eyes, refusing to look down, knowing the moment I do, it will be over, and I will go limp again. Instead, I thrust into her mouth, thinking of my mystery fairy. Chapter 14. Marin, it always came out of nowhere. One minute I am sleeping, the next, I am awoken by agonizing pain. My heart pumping in my chest erratically, and my stomach cramping terribly. I clutch my stomach and bite down on my lip to stop from screaming. I didn't want to wake Zoe. I know I keep her up at night, and she always hovers worriedly. Usually, it wasn't too bad, but tonight it was the worst it had been in 2 months. I knew he was sleeping with someone. I could tell by the pain ratio. Usually, it's just like an upset tummy, but tonight I felt like my heart was being pulverized and my stomach twisted in knots. I cry out in pain. Unable to help it, and the lights flick on. Zoe wasn't going to keep believing it was just period pain. Not after tonight. Marin, Marin, she shrieks, shaking me, but all I could do was cry out and grit my teeth while clutching my stomach. The pain was crippling. Should I call an ambulance? I don't know what to do. I will get Valerie. No, I am fine, I gasp before sweat starts beading on my forehead. I feel a draft hit me, and cold air sweeps into the room. Please don't last long, please stop. I beg the moon goddess to make it go away. How was I expected to handle this for the rest of my life? Would it always be this bad? I start sobbing, big fat tears rolling down my cheeks. I hated that Zoe would have to see me this way, hated that he made me feel this, hated him for what he made me endure nearly every night on some level, but this was worse because I knew he was actually having S*X this time, not just fooling around. I know he was having S*X, he was with another woman, and that woman wasn't me. Why did I have to be punished for his actions? Warm hands rub up and down my arms before Valerie's scent wafts to me. The pain grows worse with each second that goes past, making me scream, how did Valerie survive this for decades? I know, sweetie, just breathe, Marin, Valerie tells me, and I try to focus on her voice to distract from the intense pain. I think we should call an ambulance. Her pain is worse this time. What if something is seriously wrong with her? Zoe asks Valerie. She will be fine, it will be over soon. What will be over soon? Zoe stutters, and I could hear the concern in her voice as I writhed in pain. The mate bond, he is with someone, and it is causing her pain, Valerie explains to her. I would be mad if anyone else spilled my secrets, but I can't be mad at Valerie after everything she has done to help us. She met her mate. Zoe says, her voice soft as a murmur. Who do you think Valerian's father is? He is her mate. But why is she a rogue then, and why would he do that? Zoe says, and I see her cringe over the word we all hated so much. I blink back tears, nausea bubbling in my stomach. She didn't know when she fell pregnant, and I am afraid her parents would hate her more if they knew who the father was, Valerie explains. Valerie and I had no secrets, she knew everything now. I trusted her more than anyone. She had become like a mother to me. She supported us through everything, and she never turned me away in the 2 months I have been here. I am closer to her than I ever was with my own mother. Breathe, Marin, deep breaths, and try to sit up for me, Valerie says. I groan, and she helps me up. She hands me my bottle of water off the nightstand, cracking the lid for me before thrusting pills in my hands. They will take the edge off, she tells me, and I rock back and forth. My hands are shaking, and I spill water all over me. Zoe grabs the bottle from my hands, and I shove the pills in my mouth, not even questioning what they are. I trusted Valerie with my life. Zoe brings the bottle to my lips, and I sip it, swallowing the pills down. Tears brim in her eyes as she looks at me sadly. Go find a hot water bottle, there should be one under my kitchen sink, Valerie tells Zoe, and she darts out of the room. I can't do this, I can't keep living like this, I cry to Valerie. I wish I could take it from you, sweetie, I do, I know how hard it is, but you will get through this, you have got through so much by yourself already, just remember who you are better than him, better than what he makes you feel, Valerie says. I wouldn't be where I am without you, I tell her. The moon goddess brought us together for a reason. She won't let history repeat itself, you will find happiness, Marin. She won't turn her back on you too, Valerie says. I find her words strange but can't make sense of much and figure I misheard her as another wave of crippling pain washes over me. Zoe returns with a hot water bottle and places it on my stomach. The pain eases off again, and I pray it stays away. Please be finished, please be done, I pray, sucking in a deep breath. The following day I woke up later than usual. Zoe and Valerie let me sleep in after last night. Sitting up, I spot Zoe sitting on the floor on the rug with Valerian and Casey, her daughter. One in each arm while she fed them a bottle. Tandem feeding, I chuckle, and she nods, looking up at me before smiling sadly. Why didn't you tell me? It makes so much sense now, she says. I didn't want to talk about it, I don't like talking about his father. He didn't recognize me and tossed me away, I told her. I tried going back to tell him a couple of weeks ago. Valerie told me to try to speak with him again, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just kept remembering the look on his face. The way he screamed at me and Valerie's story scared me even more. What if he tried to take Valerian from me like her mate did to her? I had no title anymore, my wolf pathetically weak and so small compared to what I should be. I was a rogue, hardly Luna material now. Valerie said the longer she went without her mate, the harder it became to shift before she no longer could. Being rogue also doesn't help, making us weaker prey and easy pickings. I don't know how she has endured this for years. I finally saw the man she called her mate. I never saw his face, but last week I saw his BMW pull up and watched him sneak into the office with his own key. Then the next morning, I watched him leave again. I hated what he did to her. I saw her heart break as he left again, and for 3 days afterward, she could barely get out of bed. She was depressed, and the only thing that worked was me asking her to help with Valerian. I refused to become some side piece. I would rather than live the torment Valerie does. I loved her, but I now understood why she couldn't maintain this place. Him popping in and out of her life affected her more profoundly than she was willing to admit. Each time though, I noticed she grew weaker. Each time he left, her mind became fragile for days after. She even suffered nosebleeds and tremors. It was almost like watching someone suffer from withdrawals. I will make some coffee. Do you want some? I ask, and Zoe nods her head, and I turn to our small kitchenette. Our room was completely functional, floors were restained and polished, the room repainted, CS removed, and blinds put in their place. Thanks to Macy's brother, the rickety old pipes were fixed, and in the last 2 months, we had stripped and fixed all the rooms on the top floor. We were far from done, but each passing day showed progress, and the smile on Valerie's face was worth every ache, sprain, and splinter. Valerie said we could take the day off today if you don't feel up to it, Zoe tells me. No, I need to work to keep my mind off him, I tell her. She nodded her head, and I hated seeing the sadness in her eyes when she looked at me. I know she was worried, but it made me feel weak and vulnerable. You have us, we have our village, Zoe says. Valerie told Zoe the same thing, we were building our village. The more work we got done, I believed she was right. We were definitely building something. We just had to remember not to give up. But with the girls and Valerie, I knew I had found friends for life, created my own family. I missed my sister terribly, but not once has she called, and Mum changed her number. I was the forgotten child. I no longer existed in their world, no longer had a place in their lives. I cried for a good hour when that realization hit. Valerie found me on the stairs after I tried for the 100th time to contact my mother or sister. I just wanted to hear their voices, to know I wasn't forgotten. Their loss if they can't see how amazing you are, Valerie said. She sat beside me on the steps holding my hands. You don't need them, they aren't wasting tears on you, so don't waste your tears on them, they don't deserve them, she told me. Hearing a knock on the door. I get up and open it. Macy walks in before reaching down and taking Valerian from Zoe. She looks at me smiling sadly, and I know Zoe told her, yet I have no anger at my secret being out. I should have told them already. So, will you tell us now? I know Valerie knows, but she won't spill no matter how many times we ask. We won't judge, I swear, Macy says, and I knew they wouldn't, but it was me that wasn't comfortable, me judging myself. But they were right, I could trust them, they deserved to know. It kind of felt like a relief and made the following words leave my lips easier, and it felt freeing. The girls had so many questions over the last 2 months, I kept my secrets close to my heart. Their biggest was what pack I came from. I knew all their secrets, but I was ashamed of mine for some reason. They noticed my alpha aura dwindling, and now it was non-existent. Now they had another secret added to the list. I refused to tell them the father of my child was my mate. I was ashamed and thought they would think less of me because my mate didn't want me. I am the oldest daughter of Alpha John of the Shadow Pack, I tell them, and they both gasp. You're Alpha John's disgraced daughter. Macy gasps. Wait, I thought he only had one daughter. She was due to be the next Alpha. Zoe says. Nope, he is my father, and when he found I was pregnant, he told me to abort to cover it up. I said no obviously, so he shunned me and banished me, stripping me of my title. I was supposed to take over the pack when I turned 18. Well, I feel like I should be my neck in submission. I knew you had alpha genes but didn't think you were from the second biggest pack. I thought you transferred into the rogue population from another city, Macy admits. I chuckle at her as she bounces on the edge of the bed, burping Valerian. Glad I was sitting down for that news, she mutters, nudging Zoe with her knee. Well, remain seated because if you find that scandalous, you are about to have a heart fail at what I tell you next, I tell them. Scandalous? You come from one of the most influential families in the city. How would we not be shocked by that, and what could be more shocking? Zoe says, shaking her head. I take a deep breath. Valerian's father is Alpha Lucian from Dark Blood Pack. He is also my mate, I tell them, their jaws nearly hitting the floor. Macy's head turns slowly, her mouth wide open as she stares at Valerian before holding him up in the air. You mean to say that I am holding the spawn of Satan himself, that this cute little boy comes from the most vicious alpha in the city and the notorious playboy himself? Macy says, holding Valerian like she expected him to turn into his father and rip her to pieces. Yep, and that's it. No other secrets, you know the rest. That does explain the eyes. Doesn't his family have some genetic thing with eyes? I think I read that somewhere. Macy says. You're worried about his eyes? Zoe says, looking at Macy before turning back to me. Your mate and the father of your child is your father's biggest rival girl. You really don't do things half-assed, you go all in messing up, don't ya? Zoe laughs. I chuckle as she looks me up and down. Yep, the moon goddess definitely stuffed me over, that's for sure. Bad enough, he is my mate, but he also had to be my father's biggest enemy. Count yourself lucky your father banished you. Could you imagine if the Blood Alpha knew you were Alpha John's daughter and had his son? It would start a war, the city would become a bloodbath, and your father probably would have killed you, Macy says, and I had to agree, maybe things really are working out for the best. Chapter 15. 10 months later, weeks turned into months, and the hotel was nearly unrecognizable. It was just 4 rogue women and 3 babies doing what I thought was impossible when we started. At times we saw no end in sight, and all of us wanted to give up. Fix one thing, find another issue, yet we managed it. We had 4 days before the health and safety inspector came out to check our progress, the first time he came out. He gave us a list of issues and snorted his laugh at us when we told him it was only us fixing it up. He shook his head and said it was impossible and that the place should be bulldozed. Nearly a year had passed. In that time, we had fixed all the hotel rooms into immaculate rooms that simply matched or surpassed the other hotels in the city. Macy and I went hotel shopping, as we called it, and sussed out the other hotels in the city. We hired a room for a night to see the services and check out the rooms and decoration to develop our own ideas. The function room was one thing most of the hotels didn't have, whereas ours was big enough to hold weddings and formal functions. Walking into the function room, it looked like something out of a fairy tale wedding. Twinkling fairy lights hung from the ceiling, joining in the center to a crystal chandelier which was the most expensive thing Valerie paid for, but the centerpiece of the room. We had done it up as a winter wonderland inside, elegant yet also sophisticated if needed, depending on the function. All the hotel rooms were transformed, the pool area was restored, and the property's gardens were trimmed and well maintained. In the rear gardens, we found 4 water fountains that still worked. After a good tidy up, it had a tropical oasis feel. The restaurant in the main building was fully functional, and all appliances have been removed and replaced with better stainless steel and energy-efficient ones. It had a children's play area that was fully enclosed and would eventually offer child-minding services for employees and those staying in the hotel. We still had so much to do, but our most challenging task was passing the health and safety inspection and finding people to help run the place. We had made do with just fixing it up with little help from Zoe's child's father and Macy's brother. We still needed more workers to run this place. 4 women couldn't be everywhere at once. Solar panels had been placed on every building to save money on the power for running the place when it eventually opened. All that was left was the front gardens and painting the exterior, which was nearly done, but we had just run out of paint. Macy's brother was currently trimming the front hedges, and Macy was mowing the lawn with the ride-on mower she borrowed from her neighbor. Then on top of all the renovations, 3 nights a week, I went to the community college on the street behind us, and Valerie paid for my business courses. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I attended campus. I only had 1 month left, and I will have finished my studies in accounting, business management, and admin. I just hoped I lived up to Valerie's expectations. Since meeting Valerie and her taking us in, for the first time I was hopeful for the future and excited for what it would bring. You ready, Marin? I want to get back quickly. Hopefully, we will have enough daylight to finish that last side, Zoe calls out to me. Yeah, I am ready when you are, I call back to her while climbing in Valerie's truck. Zoe climbs in the passenger side, and I start the old beast up. Valerie waves from the top balcony with Valerian and Cassie in her arms, smiling and babbling happily as we turn onto the road head for the hardware store. I am beginning to worry about Valerie, Zoe says, and I hum in agreement. She had become so lately. Yeah, me too. I tried to convince her to go see the doctor last week, but she refused as always, I tell her. Zoe shakes her head and sighs. Last week I walked in on Valerie during one of her coughing fits, only this time it was much different as she wiped her mouth with her tissue covered in blood. When I confronted her about it and urged her to seek medical help, she said it had been happening for over a year now and not to worry. I worried, and it was all made worse each time her maid stopped in to see her. I had been there nearly a year, and he was like a ghost. I saw his car come and go, but I was yet to see the man's face even after a year. Zoe and I called him the Faceless Alpha. That was the only thing we figured out about him, and that was only by the apparent alpha vibes he gave off. Do you worry that he is slowly killing her, that all this time coining and going is killing her? Zoe asks. I say nothing because I know her mate was the reason she was so sick. I had already noticed it with myself. So going decades without your mate must be pure agony because I felt it with Lucian already, and it had been months, not years. I felt every time he was with a woman, each time it ed me a little more. Each time I shifted, my wolf form was weaker, a little smaller. My health deteriorated, I was always sick with the flu or stomach issues, and no matter how much I ate, I could never put on weight. My hair fell out in clumps sometimes, especially when he had been busy fooling around with women. Other times I felt drunk, making me question if he was an alcoholic. So I could only imagine how badly Valerie suffered after decades of this. The more time went on, the more I felt him, and it was horrible. It was like the mate bond was pulling me toward him, and resisting took its toll on me. He had no idea. I tried to reach out to him, fear of him taking Valerian stopped me each time. Valerian is mine, I raised him, I looked after him, and I would be damned if I let him take him from me like Valerie's mate did to her. Pulling into the car park of the hardware store, Zoe and I hop out of the car, paint code in hand and the cash for the paint. We need a new paint tray too, I cracked the other one by accident, Zoe says as we step into the store. You grab the paint, I will grab the tray, I tell her, and we split off down different aisles. Walking down the paint section, I looked for the correct paint tray. It needed to be big enough for the roller brushes, finding it. I grab a spare just in case. Heading back to the front of the store, I see Zoe waiting in line, she smiles at me, and I step over next to her. 4 liters should be enough, she asks. Yes, plenty and should have some spare, not much left to do now, I tell her, turning to the front. My heart skips a beat when his scent wafts to me. My heart thumps erratically, and I stare at the man's frame in front of me. Tall and intimidating as ever. I would recognize that scent anywhere as I stared at the back of his head. Emotion choked me as I observed him. Zoe was talking away, completely oblivious to me, trying to keep myself together. I watch as he steps up to the counter to be served. Talking casually to the man behind the counter, and he pays for his things before turning around and noticing me. He stops looking me up and down. I gulp, looking up to meet the eyes of my father. We kind of stood there for a second, and I waited for him to say something. My mouth was suddenly so dry I couldn't say a word. I hadn't seen him since the night I found out the Blood Alpha was my mate, since the night he made me sit out in the rain before kicking me off his territory and telling me to never come back. Despite all that, I missed my father, but the look of indifference on his face was enough to say he didn't miss me. He snarls, his top lip lifting over his teeth as he looks me over before looking at Zoe, who had finally noticed Alpha John. The second most intimidating man in the city and also my father. I opened my mouth to try to say something, to ask how Mum is, but before I could say anything, he turned and walked out the door. Not one word, nothing. The look of disgust on his face was the same as when he found out I was pregnant. I blink back tears before regathering myself and stepping up to the counter with Zoe. She doesn't bother saying anything. What could she say? It would change nothing. It was one thing when any of us went out, and we got the stares for being rogue from everyone else, but my own father, my own flesh and blood, it hurt more. I just wanted him to care, maybe ask how his grandson is or how his daughter is. Instead, I got nothing but a look of disgust, like I was a piece of gum that stuck on his shoe and that stung. I was nobody to him. Getting in the car, I look out the windshield to see his car. Refusing to let it get to me, I drive off, not even glancing back. The car is silent when Zoe reaches over and squeezes my knee gently, letting me know I am not alone. Pulling up at the hotel, I let out a breath. I was home. This was home and all I needed. All I needed was Valerian and our small village family. A family we made, not blood. My father proved there is more to family than just blood. Family is those that are there for you when the rest of the world turns their back on you. That is family. Unclipping my seatbelt, we got back to work, and I was more determined to prove I could do this without his help. Chapter 16. Another 2 months later. Today was the day, the last inspection to say whether or not all our hard work had paid off. Macy, Zoe, and I watched as Valerie talked to the health and safety inspector from the balcony. He had walked around the entire building with his measuring tape and torch, his clipboard tucked under his arm and pen behind his ear as he went over every nook and cranny in this place. We secretly called him the Birdman. His nose looked more like a beak, his beady little eyes too far apart. Macy snorts when a gust of wind has him clutching his toupee. It was chocolate brown and not even close to the graying on the sides of his head. Valerie watched over his shoulder as he wrote on his clipboard on the front lawn, giving the place one last scrutinizing look before shaking his head in disbelief. He tears off the piece of paper and hands it to Valerie, who stares at it. He walks over to his red sedan and climbs in while Valerie stares at the form. "Come on, we should go see what Birdman says needs doing this time," says Macy. "Zoe and I went to retrieve our kids from our room, who played happily in their playpen with their blocks. Scooping up Valerian, I set his feet on the ground, and we carefully walked down the steps to the ground floor. He started walking earlier than expected. Last month he just stood up and took his first steps. He was pretty smart for his age." Valerie is still standing in the yard, staring up at the hotel. As we approached her, a look I couldn't decipher painted her face. "He said 4 rogue women would never accomplish anything on our own without help, ladies," Valerie says, and I sigh, wondering what he has told her needs fixing. We stop beside her and look back at the huge building. No more peeling paint, the exterior white with blue and light grey trims, the hedges cut to perfection, the roof painted a deep grey, flowers hung from the top, and flowers along the hand railings. It looked like a brand new place. I lost track of the number of times doubts rained down on us, but now standing out the front looking upon the building a year later, I realized all the blood, sweat, tears, and frustration, and anger when people refused to help, were all worth it. 4 rogue women with no future, no help, and just pure determination gave this rundown hotel a new life. Every callus, every blister, every cut and graze was all worth it, every sleepless night. It all paid off, and seeing the look on Valerie's face was priceless. She was a tough woman, with an even tougher exterior, yet not even she could hide her emotion as we stared at what we accomplished. "So, what's the verdict?" I ask, staring at our hard work. "The verdict, ladies, is we are now open for business," Valerie says casually. "Well, we will get it done. We can," Macy starts to say before stopping. I look at Valerie, her lips tugging up at the corners, and Macy looks around me at her. It took a few seconds for her words to register. "Wait, you said?" Macy asks before stopping. "I said we are open for business, we did it, girls," Valerie says, and we all erupt in squeals of joy, jumping up and down excitedly. Macy howls loudly, and we join her. It must have been a sight from the road to see 4 women standing near the road howling at the sun and cheering, but we didn't care. We did it. We did the impossible. But most of all, we proved to ourselves that we could do anything with a bit of determination and probably stubbornness, hard work. We had proven to everyone who said it was impossible that they were wrong and that we were more than just 4 rogue with an unrealistic idea. That unrealistic idea was now real and standing in front of us, showing us we were capable of so much more than anyone believed of us. Laughing and walking back to celebrate with the kids, we talked about advertising and hiring. I had an idea. I ran that idea past Valerie last month, and now we only needed a chef for the restaurant when things kicked off. 4 rogue single mothers made this place what it is, so sticking to that, we decided that everyone we hired would be rogue women. A hotel owned and run by rogues, the city's less desirable. Valerie loved the idea, so Macy, Zoe, and I went to every community center and put out word last month that Valerie was hiring. The next day the lineup went halfway down the street. It was hard work interviewing everyone, but once we opened, we had 50 staff on rotational shifts. All that was needed was a head chef. But for now, Valerie and I would have to make do. Valerie was an excellent cook and had been teaching me, and that would have to be good enough until we find someone. Walking into the restaurant, Valerie walks out back to grab a bottle of wine while I hold the glasses. Hearing a cough, I pause, looking out the doors leading to the storerooms. Are you okay, Val? I ask before I hear more coughing. Val? I ask while walking into the storerooms. I see Valerie hunched over, having a coughing fit, the worst one I had seen her have as she gasped for air. The wine glasses slipped from my hands, shattering on the tiled floor when I saw her collapse. It was like watching everything in slow motion as I saw her clutch the steel shelf, her hand covered in blood. Valerie turns to look at me, no doubt to tell me not to worry when she coughs again. Blood sprays from her lips and dribbles down her chin as her eyes glazed over, and she was falling, her skin pasty and covered in a cold sweat. I screamed as I saw her tumble to the floor as I raced toward her trying to get to her in time, but she crashed against the floor. Valerie, I shriek as I clutch her, her hand weakly grabbing my arm as I pull her head into my lap. Call an ambulance, I scream out. Valerie starts choking, her hand clutching my arm as I turn her head so she doesn't choke on her own blood while she gasps for breath. Hang on, Val, help is coming, I tell her as Zoe races in, grabbing Valerian as he walks out and nearly walks over the broken glass. Zoe holds both babies, clutching them as she looks on as Valerie lay gasping for air. Macy is talking frantically on the phone to emergency services while I look down at her in my arms. It's okay, you'll be okay, she says as she gasps. Tears stream down my face as I hold her hands. Holding the hands of the woman who had the biggest heart in the world. I admired her strength, a woman I saw bigger than life and gave me a home. My heart broke when she squeezed my arm, trying to comfort me even though she was the one that needed comforting. They will be here in 20 minutes. They are flat out, Macy says, pacing. 20 minutes? I knew it would be because she is rogue. No one cares for rogues, not even the health system. Valerie turns her face to look up at me and smiles sadly. Where is Valerian? She gasps, barely audible, and I look over at Zoe. He's here, I tell her. Macy grabs him, bringing him over so she can see him. Macy stops next to her, kneeling next to us. He looks so much like his father, Valerie tells me. I nod, wiping the tears that were dripping off my chin. Valerian pats her arm, not understanding, and Valerie smiles. I move her hand for her so she can touch his little foot that was beside her. She closes her eyes, and I see a tear slip down her cheek. I am so proud of you girls, Valerie croaks out, and we all nod, all of us crying and blubbering messes as we watch one of the most inspirational women we know suffer. Don't speak like that, you will be fine. Help is on the way, I tell her. Valerie coughs. More blood spills from her lips that were a bluish tinge. Zoe hands me some paper towels, I wipe her mouth with shaky hands. Not this time, Evie, she replies. My lips quiver, and my heart breaks at her words because deep down, I knew it, I just didn't want her to go. I knew I should have pushed harder for her to see the doctor. Biting down on my lip to try to stop it from trembling. Listen to me, Evie, I need you to promise, she says, and I shake my head. I will listen when you're better, then you can tell me, then I will promise you anything, I tell her. Look after my grandson for me, you promise me that, you promise not to let my son break you like his father did me, she gasps. What? I choked out while trying to hold it together and failing terribly. The eyes. He has my son's eyes, you look after him for me. You fight for him, promise you will fight for both of them, she says before coughing and sputtering. She grabs my hand harder as her body starts heaving violently. SHH, hold on, Val, I tell her, hugging her and holding her when she stops, her body expelling what little air was left in her lungs, blood splattering across my shirt and arms. I promise, I whisper into her hair, and I kiss her head just as I hear the sirens racing up the street toward us. Zoe races out to get them when I feel her hand fall limp on my arm, and I know she is gone. Her head rolled in my arms, falling back, pulling away. I looked down at her. Her face was slack, and the color had gone as she lay limp in my arms. Paramedics rush in with Zoe, who stops in the doorway, and I look at her and shake my head. The paramedics race to work on her. I got out of their way and took Valerian from Macy as we watched helplessly while they tried to revive her. 10 minutes they worked on her, and I handed Valerian to Macy. She followed Zoe out into our room to comfort her. A few minutes later, a man rushes in wearing a tailored suit. I knew instantly it was her mate. He stops in the doorway, and I immediately see the resemblance between him and Lucian's, his son. That was also when I noticed his amber eyes were the same as Valerian's. He stood there staring down at her as they kept trying to revive her. Eventually, they stopped. There was no bringing her back. He falls to his knees, clutching his dark hair and falling apart. He did this was his fault. I knew I didn't have to tell him because he knew it too. I watched as he broke and felt nothing but numb. Valerie gave me so much and had been my rock for so long. Now she was gone because of the man falling apart in front of me. All because he refused to mark and love her. Wiping my tears, paramedics were on the phone with someone when they brought the stretcher in. I watched as they wheeled her out, thinking of what she told me and promising myself I would not let him kill me as his father did her. He will not take my son as her mate did to her. I will live for Valerian, I won't let history repeat itself. Chapter 17. A week later. Alpha Callan, Valerie's mate, stood across from me as we watched her get lowered into the ground at the rogue cemetery. Zoe and Macy stood beside me, and Macy's mother watched our kids at the hotel for us. 4 people and the tow truck driver were the only people who attended and her lawyer. I tried my best not to look at the man responsible for her DTH. We all spoke, sharing our stories with Valerie. Her mate said nothing and remained silent. I wondered what he was thinking. Did he hate himself as much as I hated him? To do this to such a wonderful woman angered me. The coroner said she died from organ failure caused by the mate bond. There were no other health issues or any explanations. It pissed me off that he was healthy and alive because he was an alpha and male, while she was DD because she was unmarked and female. It felt wrong that women die from neglect of the mate bond. It scared me because my health was already suffering, and if I wasn't careful, this could be me. When we got the report, Macy and Zoe also voiced their concerns, saying I should just mark and mate someone, so I didn't end the same way. The coroner was shocked and said he had only seen 2 cases before because most people keep their mates. He also questioned and asked if we knew who the mate was to inform them. Callan, Valerie's mate, and Lucian's father said he had no idea as we sat in the office while giving me a pointed look, warning me to not say anything. That meant he saw me when I would catch him coming and going from the hotel, sneaking in like a thief in the night. I couldn't understand why he bothered coming that day if he wasn't even going to acknowledge she was his mate. How did he explain his reasoning for being there? Though I could tell not even the coroner believed whatever BT Callan fed him. I was listed as her next of kin, which I was shocked about but glad to get some answers either way. Shaking the memory away, I listen to the priest, and when the service is finished, I watch as Callan speaks to the lawyer for a second before turning on my heel and following Macy back to her car when I hear my name being called. Marin? Which one of you girls is Marin? Comes a deep voice. We all stop, and I look back at the immaculately dressed man. He was an older gentleman, around Callan's age. Callan's lips were pressed in a line as he followed after the lawyer jogging over to us. I tell him. He stops holding out his hand to me, and I shake his hand while he catches his breath. My name is Joseph. I am Valerie's lawyer. Do you mind if I speak to you for a second? He says, pointing over to a picnic table under the trees by the parking lot. Yeah, sure, I tell him, wondering what he wanted. We will wait for you at the car, Marin, Macy calls out, and I nod, waving at her. Sitting on the bench seat. Joseph pulls some glasses from the inside pocket of his suit jacket, putting them on before digging through his briefcase. Callan sits beside him, also curious. Why the girl, what does she have to do with anything? Callan asks. Just wait, please, Alpha Callan. I will explain. About 6 months ago, Valerie came to see me, to change her will, Joseph says. My brows pinch together, and I look at Callan, who was glaring at me. Here it is, this is her current will, this is for you, he says, handing me an envelope. I noticed Valerie's handwriting, the front of the envelope read for Marin. Looking back at Joseph, I nodded, thinking that was it, about to get up. Thank you, I tell him, about to leave. Marin, I am not finished. Valerie was very insistent and went to a lot of trouble to make sure her will could not be contested or changed, Joseph says, looking over at Callan. I am not understanding, I tell him. Joseph smiles sadly before tugging on his tie and glancing nervously at Alpha Callan. I have known Valerie for 30 years and considered her a good friend, and I am aware of who you are to her, Callan. Callan growls, and Joseph puts a finger up, standing up to the man. I was able to see Joseph truly cared for Valerie. I signed a non-disclosure to not let that information out, Valerie saw to that, but since Marin here is aware of who you are and what you are to Valerie, I have not broken that or intend to, but that is why I must warn you, Callan. If you contest this will I have here, Valerie has measures in place that if you fight Marin, it will be made public information that the Blood Alpha's father let his mate D*E because of her status. Status? I loved her obviously not enough to look past her being Omega, I snapped before I could stop myself. Don't pretend to know me, girl. I don't need to know you, nor do I want to, Callan. Your actions showed me plenty of your character, I tell him, and he growls at me. Ignoring him, I turn my attention back to Joseph. What has this got to do with me? I ask him. Well, I need you to sign some documents. What sort of documents? I ask him. Valerie left everything to you and your son Valerian, everything Marin. The hotel, her bank accounts, her family's money, a considerable amount, everything she owns now belongs to you, Joseph tells me. I looking up at the tree I was sitting under and blinking back tears. Valerie was a very wealthy woman, Marin, and everything is now yours, Joseph says, and I sniffle. Callan growls and punches the table. Joseph jumps when Callan stands up before storming off toward his car. I stare after him before turning back to face the lawyer. Don't worry about him, Marin. This is what Valerie wanted, and I have known Callan for a long time. He won't risk his reputation to fight this, so what I need from you are some signatures, ID, and bank account details, Joseph says, handing me a pen. I take the pen from him, pointing out where to sign. When I am done, he gives me the deed to the hotel. You just became the new owner of Mountain View Hotel, I look forward to seeing you accomplish great things, Marin. Valerie told me all about you and her grandson. I opened my mouth, glancing around for Callan, he was gone already, and Joseph put a finger to his lips. Secrets safe with me, Marin. Valerie was a very depressed woman when I met her. In the last year, I haven't seen her happier. You and Valerian did that, he says, standing up. I shake his hand. I will bring some other paperwork over during the week, he says, and I nod, watching him leave before looking down at the deed and the envelope in my hand. Thank you, I whisper to her, hoping she can hear me wherever she is. Valerie just ensured Valerian's future, and I could never thank her enough for what she has given us, but I would trade it all in a heartbeat to have her back with us. Chapter 18. Lucian. 4 years later. I stared at my father as he gave me one of his many lectures. It irritated me that he thought he could still dictate my life. My secretary comes in, placing a steaming cup of coffee on my desk as he droned on before handing him one. He sips it before leaning forward and putting it on my desk, the sight instantly irritating me. 2 inches away, he knows how much I hate it. I grab his mug and place it on the coaster before sitting back. You need to sort your life out, Lucian. You are getting too old to be messing around constantly with these WH0RES you play with and getting blind drunk every night. If I had known you would be this irresponsible, I never would have handed the pack over to you. My personal life is none of your business. I am a good alpha. You are drunk, he bellows at me, and I smack the table with my fist. His anger instantly died down. I am just saying you are 29 years old, just mark her so she can spit out an heir for the pack. Not happening, the only person I have kids with is my mate, I tell him. 29 years, and you still haven't found her. Give up on the idea and just choose a woman. At this rate, you will be my age by the time you have your first child, Lucian. This isn't about you. It is about your pack, he says. My father growls at me. I lean back in my chair, grabbing the document off my desk to look at it when Dante walks in. Relief floods me at seeing him. He bows his head to my father. Alpha Callan, he says to his former alpha. You're dismissed, father, I tell him, wanting him gone. He was making my head ache worse. You can't just diss, I already did, I tell him, cutting him off. He rises from his chair before grabbing his mug and sculling it. He then places it down and storms out. My eyes are on the mug when Dante moves it back onto the coaster, knowing how crazy it makes me. You find out why sales dropped on all our hotels? I ask him, turning back to the document in my hand of the report. I did, and I am going to check it out myself, Dante says, making me place the document down. Check what out? I ask him, confused. We have competition, Dante says, dumping some paperwork on my desk, or actually a brochure. Picking it up, I stare down at it. Mountain View Hotel, since when? I ask him. Look at the star rating. I glance down and see it has a 5-star rating, and I read some of the reviews. Where has this place been built? That's the thing, it has always been there, under new management apparently. And you won't believe it. Believe what? I ask him. It's completely run by rogues, he answers, shocking me further. I have never noticed this place, and I grew up in the city, I tell him, not believing it is possible. Where did a rogue get enough money to own a hotel? It's on the main drag, the first hotel as you drive in from the western borders, backs onto the nature reserve, he says, but I still have no idea what he was talking about. FKU and your silver spoon, of course, you have no idea what I am talking about, near the train station. Seeing as you have never caught public transport in your life, you would have missed it. I press my lips in a line. He was right, though. I usually stick to my own territory and hardly spend any time on the western side of the city, but still, a hotel this size you would think I would notice since it was on the main street. Opened 3.5 years ago, apparently they are not only cheaper, but they have better services, and I think people are just interested in seeing a hotel run by rogues. Great, it's a circus for a tourist attraction, not that I have anything against rogues, I just have a hard time being outdone by them. Well, I will suss it out today, don't bother, I will go, might book the Alpha meeting there. Alpha John kicked up a stink when he heard we were hosting it and wants it on neutral ground. I have another job for you anyway. What's that? He asks. I want you to distract my father, I tell him, and he scrunches up his face. Oh no, last time he gave me a tour of the city I have lived in my entire life, Dante says. I smirk. Can't I go with you? He whines. No, I know he is waiting for you to leave so he can give me a lecture on creating an heir, so I need an escape, and this seems perfect, I tell him while holding up the brochure. I don't see why I can't come with, he says, getting up. Oh, and Ashley is downstairs looking for you, Dante tells me. Ah, I never should have touched that one, she is like a leech, I groan, and Dante laughs. Yeah, you have to be more careful where you stick, Dante says. Get rid of her for me, I tell him, and he growls. Why do I need to get rid of her? I didn't FK her, he says. Fine, I will just distract my father for me so I can escape, I tell him. He leaves, then mind links me when the coast is clear, something about he asked my father if he was familiar with graphs. My father was always unable to help himself when he wanted to show off his knowledge, though Dante would give me HL later over it. Sneaking out, I catch the lift to the ground floor before walking to the exit, only to see Ashley smile when she spots me. She flicks her blonde hair over her shoulder before pulling down her dress that had ridden up. Don't know why she bothered. I could still see the bottoms of her cheeks if she turned around. Lucian, honey, busy, and don't call me that, I tell her, walking past her. She grabs my hand, and I shake her off, walking out for the valet to notice me. He rushes off to get my car while I am stuck standing next to Ashley. Want to go out later, she says, pawing at my shirt. I shove her hands off, and she pouts. What part of, I am busy, don't you understand? I ask her. She says nothing for a few moments, and her face reddens. You know you don't have to be such a P*K, Lucian, Alpha Lucian, we are not familiar, just because I don't think it means anything more than that. Now get off me, I tell her, putting distance between us. She starts crying. I roll my eyes, this couldn't be happening. Seeing people staring, I tell her to shut up, making her cry more. The valet brings my car over, and I growl, stomping and opening the passenger side. Get in, and I will drive you home when I am done, I tell her through clenched teeth, knowing she caught a cab. She wouldn't shut up the entire time I was driving. Following the navman, I look for this stupid hotel. What are you looking for? Ashley asks, and I ignore her when I spot it. How had I never noticed it before? The place was huge, and it looked like every part of a 5-star hotel. This couldn't be owned by a rogue. The lawns and hedges were well maintained, the exterior had a very coastal tropical feel. Giant palm trees and hanging plants, well-trained vines ran along the guardrails. A colossal water fountain sat in the center of the car park. Getting out, I look at Ashley quickly. Stay here, I will be back in a minute, I tell her. Ashley nods to me and pulls her phone out. I slammed my door a little too hard. Walking around, I looked at the place. The restaurant was packed, every seat is taken, waiters were inside serving guests. The food smelt divine, and I growled in annoyance before opening the restaurant door. I could hear people in the back of the kitchen singing happy birthday, and those eating at the tables had all stopped to sing along when a woman brought a cake out, placing it on a table, all the staff singing behind her as they followed. Her scent instantly hit my nostrils as they sang happy birthday to a girl that looked younger than her. My entire body locked up in shock, and all I could do was stare at the woman who had her arms wrapped around the girl whose birthday it was. Mate, my skin was buzzing, my heart beat faster, and I wanted to claim her, not even caring for the people around. My entire body calls me toward the petite woman. Her uniform indicated she was some kind of manager here, and her hair was pulled in a bun on her head, showing off her neck where I wanted to sink my teeth. Everyone cheered as the younger girl blew out the candles when the singing was done. "Oh, we need napkins," I hear my mate's melodious voice. I was entranced by her, my mouth watered as I watched her walk away and back into the kitchen. She was a little skinny, but I would fix that. She also looked tired, but she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Walking over to an older woman, I tap her on the shoulder. She glances at me briefly before looking back down. "Can I help you, Alpha?" she asks, picking up my aura. "Yes, that woman that walked out the back to get napkins, Marin, sir." "How can I help you?" she says, standing up to look at me from cutting the cake. Her eyes dart to mine, and she steps back, bumping into the table and the younger girl, who then looks at me. Her eyes go wide, and she clutches the woman's arm. The fear on both their faces was evident. I knew I was feared, but I did nothing, only asked a simple question. They acted like I was about to go on some spree. My reputation was terrible, but I wasn't expecting such fear from two women I had never met before. "Zoe, go check on Marin," the woman says. Marin, why did her name sound so familiar to me? Chapter 19. Marin. I watched Zoe blow out her candles. Today was her 21st birthday, and I was blessed to call her one of my best friends. She is more like a sister to me. Zoe and Macy filled the places where my family should have been, but now I was happy with how far we all had come. We didn't need anyone, we only needed each other. "Happy 21st, I whisper to her, giving her a hug after setting the cake down. "Oh, we need napkins," I tell Zoe before rushing off back to the kitchen. I go into the storeroom, grabbing a box of refills down and pulling a handful out before placing the box on the shelf. Just as I walk back out, Zoe rushes into the kitchen, her face pale and a look of H0RR0R on her face. She smacks straight into me before grabbing my arms. "What is it? What happened?" I ask her, looking around for what scared her. When she didn't answer, I went to walk past her to investigate myself. It must be bad for her not to be able to tell me. Zoe feared nothing these days. She had come out of her shell, but something happened for her to be such a nervous wreck. "You can't go out there," she exclaims, gripping my arms and pulling me away from the door just as I was about to step out into the restaurant. I hear Macy talking behind me in the restaurant. "Sir, you can't go back there," I hear her call to someone. "What happened?" I ask her. Zoe, gripping her arms when her eyes go wide as she stares over my shoulder. I got the feeling that who she feared was right behind me. Only a second later, I stood up straight, his scent wafting to me, and Zoe's eyes darted to mine. My face must mirror the same H0RR0R hers do because she grabs my hands, squeezing them. I close my eyes, willing myself not to break. He will not break me. He does that nearly every night, I live with it. I won't give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Your name is Marin, right? I fight to shiver hearing his voice mate bond. It's bad enough it tortures me, why does it have to affect me this way? Every piece of me wanting to throw myself in his arms despite the fact he nearly ruined me. The bond wanted that, not me. I was in control, I fought it this long, and I didn't work this hard for everything to unravel right now. Yes, how may I help you, Alpha Lucian? I ask, turning around. My lungs compressed at the sight of him. He was gorgeous, and he knew he was, which just enraged me. Tall, dark, and handsome. What is it with men? They grow older, manlier, and more handsome while women just age? My inner monologue was out of whack today, was taking up a good chunk of my vocabulary. You know my name and who I am? He asks. I also know what you are too, so how may I help you? I asked him. I was impressed with how calm I sounded, despite screaming internally and wanting to run. He blows out a breath and runs a hand through his hair before scratching his neck. He looks back out to the restaurant. How old are you? He asks. Old enough to know you are my mate if that's what you are wondering, I tell him. Didn't I know it? 5 years of agony because I knew. He seemed taken aback by my tone, yet I hated him despite the feeling bratting through the bond that wasn't even forged yet. I hated what he put me through, hated how he hung up when I tried to tell him I was pregnant and laughed at me, saying he would never FK a 17-year-old. Well, you did. And she raised your son herself, not that I would tell him that. Valerian is my world, and we don't need him in our lives. I step past him and back into the restaurant, managing to avoid his hand as he tries to touch me. Can we talk? He asks. He looks nervous. I got the inkling that he didn't struggle this much with women, he clearly wasn't expecting it from his mate. We just did. Nice chat. Macy will escort you out, I tell him, pointing to Macy while I checked the dessert displays and grabbed a knife. Look, I know this came as a bit of shock, but But you what? Thought I would run off into the sunset with you, for you to mark me, no thanks. The door is just behind you, if you just turn around, you shouldn't miss it, but in case you do, there is a green sign above it saying exit, I tell him. Wow, you are a real piece of work, he snaps. Well, unless you are here for a specific reason that isn't about being my mate, then get out. Actually, I came here for a reason, he mutters while looking around. We had managed to draw half the restaurant's attention, though we talked rather quietly. I knew it was his O*RA. As soon as I dismissed him, he got his hackles up and spilled it out. I need to speak to the manager about holding the annual alpha meeting here, he says before pulling a brochure from his pocket. Don't you have your own hotels to do that? I ask him. I have been asked to hold it on neutral territory. Well, we are fully booked, I tell him. I didn't even give you the date, he snaps. I know, but whatever date it is, the place is fully booked, and if it isn't, I will make sure it is, I tell him, placing the cutting knife and napkins on the table next to Zoe's birthday cake. I want to speak to the manager, he says, following me around. You're speaking to her, I tell him, clearing the table and walking back out to the kitchen. I scraped the plates before placing them in the sink and turning around, only to almost run into him as he was standing so close. I step back. Then I want to speak to the owner. You're looking at her, I tell him. You own this place, he scoffs. Yeah, is that an issue? Do you feel threatened by my 5-star rating compared to yours? Didn't think a rogue woman could outdo you, I bet that is the real reason you're here, You finally realized where all your guests went. Well, he doesn't finish, instead, shutting up. It is, isn't it? Yes, and no, I wanted to book your functions room for the alpha meeting and also check out the competition. I wasn't expecting to find my mate though, he says. Buy best-selling books online. Well, like I said, we are booked out, so if you will excuse me, I tell him, and he growls, stepping into my path. Why are you being like this? He asks. Being like what, Alpha Lucian? This. I am your mate, I am well aware. Then stop, just let me take you out or something, go somewhere with less of an audience, he says, glancing around at the chefs. No, thank you, have you got a boyfriend, is that it? No. I don't feel the need to FK everything in sight. Excuse me, he asks. I roll my eyes, trying to step around him when he blocks me again by placing his arm on the bench. I have work to do, please move, I tell him. Being an alpha, I can forcefully mark you to make you submit. Our law state alphas can mark their mates if the mate is unwilling. Being rogue, I don't give a FK about status, and if you try that, that just shows your true character and every reason as to why I don't want to be your mate. So that's it, he asks. I shrug, needing him to move. His boxing me in like this filled my head with his scent, making me want to do things I shouldn't do to him. So, you hate me over what the media spills about me, you will judge me off that? You don't even know me, we just met, he says. He still hadn't realized who I was. We have met 3 times now, both other times a disaster because he was drunk, and well, I was underage, so this is on him either way. He should have been able to recognize me the first time. I would give you the world, and you wouldn't even give me a chance? No, you would give me syphilis-transmitted disease, so I am not interested, I tell him, realizing I was going to have to touch him to escape. I try to step around him when he traps me between him and the steel counter, his hands going to either side of my hips. Don't pretend the mate bond doesn't affect you the same as it does me, Marin, he says, leaning in. I was rooted to the spot, completely frozen as he pressed his face into my neck. He growls, the sound more like a purr the longer he sniffs me before he gr0ans. Lucian, baby? Lucian, where are you? Comes a sugary sweet voice. Lucian freezes and growls at the blonde woman as she rushes in, shock on her face when she spots us. Oh, there you are, she says, rushing over, and he glares at her. I am not your baby, not your honey or any other stupid name you think you can call me, get out, Ashley, he snaps so cruelly I actually felt bad for her, she looked between us and her eyes well with tears. Get out! He screams at her. But nothing, I have work to do, and you should take your girlfriend home, I tell him, using her as an escape. I quickly grip his wrist, moving it off the bench. I try not to think of the tingles that rushed across my palm though Lucian gasped at my touch. She isn't my girlfriend, he says, glaring at her. Lucian, Ashley asks. You can do better, I tell her as I walk past her and place my hand on her shoulder. She looks at me and smiles sadly. It was odd feeling sorry for the girl. That's all you have to say, you aren't angry at her. Why would I be angry at her? Did you expect me to get jealous? Is that the reaction you were hoping for? I haven't got the time or the energy to feel anything for you, I tell him before turning on my heel and walking out. Macy and Zoe were waiting by the door as I walked out. Macy went to touch me, but I held up my hand to signal her away. She knew instantly not to touch me, she knew I would break. Go, I will handle this, they tell me. I rush out the door, heading for one of the apartments out the back that Zoe and I shared. I run through the gardens and up the steps before unlocking the door. The moment I close it, I fall apart. Chapter 20. Lucian. I wasn't proud of my actions after leaving the hotel and my mate. Ashley wouldn't stop crying and demanding to know who Marin was to me, but I also knew if I told her right now, it would be all over the city by the end of the day, and the last thing I wanted was the media hunting Marin down and harassing her. So, I remained quiet the entire drive until I pulled up out of the front of her house. Ashley reaches for me, and I pull away. I couldn't stand her touch, it repulsed me, and my entire body was pulling me back in the direction of my mate. I needed to figure out something fast. I had been away from her for only 5 minutes. I don't know how my father survived my mother dying. This was agony, and barely any time slipped past. Get out! My voice was more of a growl. Startled by it, Ashley jumped, looking at me nervously. Get out! I screamed at her when she sat frozen in her chair, staring at me. The command rolled over her, and her hand reached for the door handle before hastily getting out. And Ashley? I ask as she climbs out of the car. She stops, her hand still on the open door, and looks back in at me. Don't come looking for me. Stay away from me, or you will find yourself living with the rest of the Forsaken, I tell Ashley. She gasps. I had never banished anyone from the city before. We tried to usually avoid forsaking wolves, but she just made finding my mate an entirely new struggle when she couldn't remain in the gotched car like I asked. Her puffy red eyes blink at me in shock at my words before she nods and slams my door shut. I start the drive home with a sigh, wanting nothing more than to go back to the Mountain View Hotel and retrieve my mate. I couldn't understand why she didn't want me. Wasn't that all she-wolves wanted was to be mated to an alpha? Yet, she tossed me aside like she felt nothing for me. And she was a BL00DY rogue. She should be jumping for joy. The chances of an alpha being bonded to a rogue were rare. It isn't like it has never happened, but most alphas are bonded to other alphas. I only know of 2 other alphas in the country mated to someone of lower rank. But Marin was the first rogue I had heard of being bonded to alpha. However, I didn't care, I just wanted her. She could have been a freaking unicorn for all I cared. I have always wanted my mate. I trusted the moon goddess to make the right choice for me, and after seeing her, I couldn't imagine being with anyone else. My mind is entirely consumed with her, her scent, the tingles that rushed over me when she touched me. But something was off, it was right on the tip of my tongue, but I had this weird sense of déjà vu, which I knew was insane. I definitely would have recognized my mate had I seen her before, but even her name, I swear I had heard that name before but couldn't place it. One thing I did know was, I would have to find a way to win her over. I could mark her forcefully. It was allowed by our laws. Alphas can become weakened without their mates, all mates do, and it was unacceptable for an alpha to be debilitated because they were longing for their Luna. If the alpha is, the entire pack is put at risk, and I couldn't allow that. I needed her, and she needed me. She would feel the pull, it was inevitable. She was good at pretending I didn't affect her, but her heart rate said otherwise, the way her breathing increased at my proximity. But no one can live without their mate, or so I hoped, and she would be mine. Pulling back into the parking lot of my hotel, I groan when I see my father's car still parked where it was. I was hoping Dante could get rid of him while I was gone, but what intrigued me the most was the car parked beside it. A growl escapes me when I see Alpha John's car parked in my reserved parking spot beside my father's. What was he doing here? Jamming on the brakes, I stop, and the valet rushes over when I toss my door open, leaving the car running and stalking inside. The receptionist jumps at the growl that escapes me, echoing off the marble floors and the windows vibrate. Where is he? I snapped at her. Conference room 1, Alpha, with your father and Beta, I nod, heading for the stairs instead of the elevator, not willing to wait. I take the stairs on the left and race up the steps to the first floor. This side of the first floor was mainly office buildings and off-limits to patrons, the other half was the sectioned off and all restaurants and bar areas. When I reach the door, I swipe my card to let myself in and then hear the click of the locks before the door swings inward. Walking past a few open doors, I could see pack members look out at me nervously. It was no secret that Alpha John and I didn't get along. We were constantly in the media and had even a few public incidents recently that had the entire city on edge that a war was coining. Honestly, it was inevitable. Alpha John had been overstepping and recently had a few of the smaller pack businesses shut down, burned out, or even robbed. He wanted part of my pack's border and was willing to try and get it by any means necessary, no matter who he was hurting in the end. And since the main streets and the streets behind it were neutral territories, he couldn't stake a claim to the land, but that didn't stop him from driving those living there or owning businesses there out. Unfortunately, without proof and no one wanting to get involved, there wasn't much anyone could do. He had them running scared. Alpha John was a sneaking bastard, never doing his own dirty work, and there had been rumors he had been even getting help from the higher UPS in the human cities. This was not a time to be having a war in our own city, not when so many people had gone missing recently. We have kept track of many she-wolves, and even a few forsaken wolves had gone missing. Talk of hunters coining back had the entire city on edge already. The last thing we needed right now was for our city to look divided. It would make it easier for the city's human communities to pick us off. It was no secret that werewolves existed, but that doesn't mean there weren't extremists amongst the humans that wanted to eradicate our kind. Our cities have lived in peace now for centuries. However, werewolves and humans have clashed every now and then. The conference room door bangs against the wall loudly when I shove it open. Dante leaned against the wall with his arms folded, looking rather angry about something. My father and John stop whatever they were discussing to look up at me when I notice another girl in the room. She did not look impressed to be here, but I could tell she was Alpha John's daughter by her scent. I had heard of her a few times and seen her in the papers. Alpha John had been struggling with her, she could be quite the troublemaker, and I had even seen a few inappropriate photos and videos surfaced of his daughter drunk and him dragging her out of different establishments. "Ah, son, just in time," my father says, standing up and motioning for me to sit. I walk over to the table but don't sit down. I didn't like whatever the heck was going on here. My father hated Alpha John more than I did. Yet, he never did tell me what started their feud, so I was a little shocked to see them sitting around chatting like they were friends. "What are you doing on my territory?" I ask John. He sits back in his chair and folds his arms across his chest with a smirk on his face. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.